Um, First, I'm in my garage. Welcome to EMS Abounds Interview. I'm in my garage because I was trying to do this outside, but there are so many birds around the camper, and we're next to an airport. There's too much noise here, background-wise. So welcome from sunny Apopka, Florida, where the high today is going to be 86 or 87. I will endeavor to persevere, though. So
Sounds difficult.
it is. It is. My guest today is my daughter, Amanda Jenks. And why? Well, because part of my goal with this series is to learn from people, to learn what options are out there, both professionally and as far as like furthering education. And you certainly have a different path that you are taking that I want to get into. You and I agree a lot on not education, but on job experience and where you can get the most, how you can improve yourself. And I'm pretty well known for saying why, but I'd love other people to hear your take on that. So here we go. It is okay to be nervous. The others were also, right? I'm still nervous. I mean, I'm not exactly,
You're a YouTube professional now.
Oh, yeah.
I talked all about your YouTube channel at work yesterday.
Nice. I'm hoping that I can get your boss to put this out on his web thing, but because I told him, this should help recruit. I mean, in years past, where you are now, and we'll get into that, it's done this, and I will say those opinions because to keep you out of trouble. But it's been hard to recruit. It's been easy to recruit. It's been hard to recruit, and I think you guys should be in a position now where people want to work there.
It's finally getting better.
Yeah, and so and that's one of my goals with this is that for people like I told Craig at Concord Hospital, talk about what you guys have coming up, for medics, for EMS, for whatever, and if it helps people recruit, retain, whatever, that's part of one of my goals as well. So, paramedic, the big 10-year mark now.
Super stoked.
Yeah, which makes me feel wicked old.
It should.
I know. But I think that 10-year mark is remarkable for a couple of reasons. One, longevity. And in theory, if you sucked that bad, you'd be gone long before 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't always work that way, but
unfortunately.
Yeah. I think 10 years is remarkable in any career field. So EMT, the old EMT intermediate, which I understand you had a phenomenal instructor, and then
I was a first responder too. I'm just ticking all the boxes.
That's right too. I forgot first responder. So
yeah,
you have 3 younger siblings, 2 of which are medics. So it's obvious.
It's like a bad joke. 3 paramedics and a diesel mechanic walk into a bar. Like,
I know. And I don't know. I'm pretty certain Scott got swapped in the isolette at Frizz. But what got you interested in EMS?
Well, I mean, to be fair, you did. So, New Durham had that Explorer program. That wasn't even Explorer. What was it called? It was called a junior member, right?
Yeah.
And so I went down to the fire station and I was like, well, I'll be an EMT. And then they paid us for it, which was wild at 14 years old to be like hanging out with my dudes, Mike and Mike. And we would just go hang out with our dads and go on calls. And they paid us like $9 an hour, which was, decent money when you're 14 years old, just like sitting in a pickup truck. So that was great. And then what else did we do? Oh yeah, and then I took Raylan's first responder class at 14, 15. I don't even know if I could drive yet. And then took your EMT class. And then I think you thought I was going to go to nursing school. And I was like, maybe I'll do that. I'm not going to do that. And yeah.
Well, I think at one point you were talking about either nurse anesthetist, or nurse practitioner. And I think that may have, that's a step on the way. So,
Right. But I think the problem was that I was like, I'm having much too much fun doing this. And so it just stuck with it. And then, yeah, so did your EMT class and then did the intermediate class. I was working per diem for Farmington, which was so easy. Like, just do 24s with your buddies. Like, that was sweet. And then, oh, yeah, because I went to Laconia for the first year for gen eds. And like, oh, should I do nursing school? Should I do paramedic school? And then you were like, well, I want you to do nursing school. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. By the way, I applied to paramedic school and I got in. So I'll be doing that in September. Like, so, and that was fun. That was
what?
like the OG tech, not your level of OG tech, but like older than the program is now. But so it was a little
Well,
bit different because there
there
were
was,
13 of us that started, and by the time they beat us down, we were at like 6, I think, that graduated, or 7. But
and there was overlap there from my class in 1987. I mean, the
right,
director, well, she was still there, was one of my instructors.
hmm
Why? So you went to New Hampshire Tech in Concord. Why
yeah.
did you pick the Tech as opposed to, say, the NEMC program at the Elliott, or Northern Essex, or one of these other programs?
I didn't know a whole hell of a lot about it when I applied for it, or about like the paramedic programs in general, because I knew that the tech was there, and I knew like vaguely about NEMC, but I was like, I should probably go to college, which I'm glad I did. So now I have an associate's with it. Um, I didn't even really know about NECO or Pro or anything until I started working at Trinity in the first year of paramedic school. I went to Trinity, so I just didn't know. I'm like, oh, it seems good. It's right there. It's in Concord.
Yeah. And if you had asked me about it beforehand, I mean, the advice I've always
No, can't do that.
advice I've always given EMS folks on, hey, where should I go to paramedic school, is got a ton of good experience as an intermediate or A, then something like NEMC is great. If you don't, I think the Tech is better because they do more clinical rotations,
Right.
more in-house, and I think that's where you get the majority of your experience. They do more ride time. They do, than these other programs. So that's my take
And I
on it.
think going into it that I thought I had some experience as an EMT. I mean, I did like 2 or 3 years, in Farmington or New Durham, and then getting into paramedic school. And then I started working at Trinity, and I was like, oh my God, I have no experience in life. I'm a small Stratford County girl in Lowell, Massachusetts. Like, so I think that was like good. So I'm glad I like did go to the tech because there was a lot more ride time, which was good.
So 10 years in, why stay in EMS? Why haven't you
Um,
moved?
because I still love it every day, I think. And I think there are like good days and bad days. And I think the only reason I'm still in EMS is that I started going to therapy a couple of years ago. And hit that like super burnout. I would just sit in my car and cry and be like, I can't go to work. I can't do it. I love my job, but I can't do it. And so I think that's like one of the things that I could point to for longevity is like I started going to therapy about it, and about like just life in general. And I think that's probably like a good tool that like people don't really talk about. So like you can go and process whatever you need to work on, so that way when you do go to some disastrous shit show call, then you can be like, okay, like I have the tools to like not never come back to work. Because I think like we all work with people who are like one bad call away from never coming to work again. I didn't really like want to be there. And I felt like I probably was close to that. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's great advice, for people. I mean, when I do classes, I talk about, hey, I've been to counseling once or twice. It wasn't EMS related, but
Right.
it,
But it like flows over, I think.
oh, yeah, and if you need to, or think you might need to, then it's absolutely the right thing to do. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that if an old dude like me,
Right.
can talk about it and say there's benefit to it. It helps other people who, you know, go, hey, maybe it is for me. Because like my
Right.
generation and older, you didn't do that. You sucked it up, be a man, and that's the attitude that I grew up with. And
Right.
it's not really the right one. So
I
I'm
think
glad.
it's like interesting thinking about it because I remember being on Farmington's ambulance and seeing like you do intercepts with Frisbee or Brian Cartier or Ian McKenzie, and I was like, those guys are the coolest dudes I've ever met. And every time they opened the back doors of the ambulance, I was like, whew, thank God they're here. They fix anything, you know? And so like that's like how I want to, not like as like a hero complex, but like I remember like feeling like super reassured that whomever was there, and that's like how I want to feel at work, and not like some of the older guys that you're like, really, that's a bad attitude. You know what I mean? Like we get frustrated, I think, at work because of what we do, but I don't want to like feel like I gotta shit on these other providers just because my life is miserable. So, and that's like a big part of it.
Yeah, whatever you're fidgeting with is very loud.
Tissues, the corona allergies.
I get. Um, so you mentioned Trinity. You
Mm-hmm.
did. You started out doing BLS in Lowell, right?
Yep. I got hired at Trinity as an intermediate, which was pretty sweet because they would, which selfishly, they would pay you to whatever your highest level was, even though we didn't work as intermediates in mass. So I was an intermediate, but a basic EMT in Lowell. I did some transfer stuff in Haverhill, and that was nice. And then I graduated paramedic school and applied to AMR in Manchester because I was like, I'm going to do 911. And then they sent me whoop the email with how much I was going to make. And I was like, not today, Satan. I'm not going to make less than I did as an intermediate basic EMT in the city of Lowell. So I stayed at Trinity for a little while. And I think late, like more in Haverhill and 911 in New Hampshire, like where I was on a PB truck, but my partner was a medic. We were just two dancing girls having the time of our lives. Um, and then I think I applied enough at Frisbee that Gary just got irritated and gave me an interview. And then I went to Frisbee, which was great.
Yeah. And the funny thing with Trinity is I was there during some of that, and we get to work some shifts together,
Mm-hmm.
which not all companies allow, and not maybe all family members should do together. But I enjoyed it,
Mm-hmm.
and so kind of. So you go to Frisbee, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
come back to Frisbee in a minute. You've also worked at, well, it's now Concord Hospital Laconia, but it was Lakes Region General Hospital, LRGH. What was your role
Mm-hmm.
there?
So at Lakes, I was a paramedic in the ER, which I went there kind of when they had this transition time period. So I came from Frisbee, and the director there at the time was like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't want to be an ER tech. I don't want to like sling IVs and do EKGs because I'll be bored out of my mind. I said at Frisbee, I've worked shifts in the ER. I can handle a patient assignment. I want to work like a nurse in the ER. And she was like, great, that's what we're going towards. So that's what I did there between like Lakes and Franklin.
Um,
So,
what There was something unique there that they're still doing now. You, I believe, were the trendsetter um, with
God.
being resource or charge as a medic in the ER. How did that work?
If they had a big turnover at Lakes for a while, and then one summer, everybody was knocked up, so there was no staffing. So I think like there was like one weekend that I was in charge as the most experienced person working there because I had a bunch of grad nurses and stuff, and they were like, "Well, you'll be in charge this weekend. Good luck." But it was like pretty infrequent. It was
Well,
more like the
currently
resource person. I don't know if that's what they're doing now.
they are. They're using medic. I
Hmm.
think it's on weekends too, from what Craig said. But they're using
Hmm.
some of the medic. Some of them can do charge, resource, whatever they call it. Um,
Right.
I'm sure it's based on experience and whatnot. But that
Yeah.
is, I mean, super unique. I mean, I remember being accosted by ER nurses because I was doing patient care in an ER. New Hampshire ENA tried to get laws passed saying we couldn't do it, or if we did, it was a tech, and you had to, the nurses couldn't delegate to you. And so Frisbee got around it by going, yeah, you're right, they can't. So your peers, the ER doc delegates. And
Right.
now, I mean, we're at the point where a lot of ERs have medics, super wide range scope of practice. So some are techs, some are doing full loads, some are running shift. And like at Huggins, there's the paramedics, the director. So we've
Right.
come a super long way with that.
Lakes was nice because like I loved working there besides the like eventual burnout, but like I had my own assignment. I would just chill with my patients and it was great. And
yeah.
because I'd worked like for a couple, like 6 weeks, I think, at the Seacoast Leading Medical Center and just got abused by the staff. Like, oh, go do all my IVs, go do all my meds, go do all this. And I was like just a tech there in the ER. And at the end of 6 weeks, I was like, this isn't really for me. Like,
Right.
no. So,
I 2001, 2000 or 2001, I was doing nights at Frizz, and your mom was
love the
still at
night shift.
LRGH, and they needed help. And the nurse manager at the time wanted to implement medics the way they are now. And they asked me if I'd come on and help transition that. I said, sure. I got off orientation. I did one shift and quit. It was 5 in the morning and I'd done a chest pain. I'd worked the chest pain up. My nurse partner comes in, starts asking all the same questions over and over. I said, hey, we're done. We're ready for the doc. And we went out to the nurse's station. She went, no, I have to do my assessment. I went, I've already done it. She was like, well,
Right.
we're not peers. I have to do mine. I said, your boss thinks we're peers. And she said, we're not peers. You're a paramedic. I'm a nurse. And I spun literally in a 360-degree angle to collect myself because my first thought was I was going to punch her right in the mouth. And I quit. 7 o'clock. I left at 7. She was the only one there. I left at 7. I told the nurse manager, I said, this is what you're up against. I will not play this game ever again. So
Right.
you're welcome. Yeah, that was a very common attitude then. So,
Right. And
and
I think Lakes got lucky after that because they had a couple of the older guys there that are retired, I think from like fire medic stuff, and they like worked as techs and like worked their way up until the nurses went, oh, like these guys are great. And so now they do patient assignments and stuff, but they were there kind of, I don't want to say like in the trenches for a while, but they were like ER techs and had to like prove themselves to the nurses. And now like when I left Lakes, like the attitude was like, oh, we love our medics, which was nice.
yeah, the thing that I loved at Frisbee coming up through that, I mean, from when I started there in '87 till I came and left twice, but we would still into the 2000s, we'd have nurses come in for orientation and they'd try to shit on us, and we would be doing their orientation, and
Right.
all I had to do was go to one of the nurses like Mel or Siobhan and go, hey, you want to deal with them because I'm not. And they would run
Right.
them out if they did not like buy into it. Literally, they would just run
Right.
them out of that ER. So uh, I love getting a little bit of that history into this for people also. So
It's kind of funny at Frisbee right now because we have travel nurses. And so you'll get the travel nurses. And then, like at Lakes, too, when I was there, when we had, like, at one point, 18 travel nurses in the ER. And the nurse, would be like, oh, well, can you go do that EKG for me? And the other nurses would be like, that's not, they're not there to be abused. That's not how that works. So
yeah,
that's kind of nice.
yeah, Huggins was the same thing. We'd have travel nurses in the summer, and it took like one shift of the medic showing them how the ER ran to go,
Right.
oh yeah, okay, you know. Um,
Right.
and travel nurse at 120 bucks an hour, you're a lot more laid back about how shit runs. Oh, the medic
Right.
wants to do that? Okay, cool, I'm fine. Um,
Right.
you're back at Frisbee full time. Tell me
Hmm.
about what the Frisbee system is. Like, What,
So
yeah.
Frisbee system's great. Um, we do primary 911 for the city of Rochester, and then we intercept to like 10 or 12 or 13 towns regularly, as well as like some outliers. Like we'll get somebody from coming down from Ospey with action every once in a while, or like every once in a while we'll go to Berwick or see North Berwick kind of stuff, as well as doing the intercepts and the 911, which is like pretty busy. I think we did like 6,000. We did almost 7,000 calls last year, and I think 1,000 of them were intercepts. So like the city of Rochester itself is pretty busy. And then we'll do emergent transfers out of the ER. So if somebody comes in with chest pain, they do a 12 lead. The nurse will come out with the EKG and be like, "Hey, it's a STEMI." So we'll go back the truck in and then help the nurse get the patient ready. So we're usually out the door in like 20, 22 minutes. We'll take them to Portsmouth. Because that's like our STEMI center. And then we'll occasionally do like emergent transfers out of the ER, like you have a pulseless limb. This is a AAA, and we can't wait for the private ambulance service to get here. Stuff like that we will also take out of the ER to Portsmouth, which is nice because if somebody's like has status one emergent issue, we'll just take them out. So that's nice. We don't do it a lot, but it's like the availability of it is there. So
How many trucks are you running in 24 hours?
I mean, I think it's like everywhere with the staffing issues currently, but we do the goal is two trucks 24 hours a day with the Intercept truck from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Occasionally we'll drop down at night and have one truck with Medic 5 overnight. But
So back in '09, I think it was, I did a study for numbers to justify putting that second truck overnight. And we were doing 6,600 then, but a lot more of it was intercepts.
the call volume there has died down because there's a lot more services in the area, which have paramedics, which is like good for their services for sure.
Right. But when you look at, let's say it's two trucks, 60, let's say what, 6,500, whatever, 911 calls, not intercepts. I mean, that's equivalent to a Manchester Nashville workload for each truck.
Right.
And people think, oh, it's Rochester.
Yeah, I think I worked Saturday in between 7 a.m. Saturday and 7 a.m. Sunday. We did 34 calls with two trucks.
Yeah, that's a big workload.
And just like 22 or 23 alone on the day shift. So you're just like running around. But
And the other thing that makes that, in my mind, makes that a lot busier is you guys historically, again, my fault, but you do more in the field. It's expected. I mean, is it still this way? It's expected if it's going to happen in the ER and you have it in the field, it should be done when you hit the ER.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so it's not just
joke around with Laurel at night where she's like, "Well, you think they weren't going to come in with two IVs intubated with an NG tube?" Like, I was like, "Yeah, if you put Foley's on the truck, I'll do that too. Like, it's fine."
Yeah, so it's not just nebs and IVs and which some ALS systems, unfortunately, oh, we're too busy and we'll throw a line in or we'll give them a nab and that's it. No mag, no whatever. So it's a busy system.
Right.
What about with it as busy as it is? What are you guys doing in the ER between calls now? Are you still working like with patient rooms and assignments, or is it just kind of more EMS most of the time?
No, we still work in the ER, so it's like in between calls, you'll hang out with the nurses and, oh yeah, I'll go line and lab this patient or do meds. Then if anybody like sick comes in, you tend to find us like vultures in there. So like anybody conscious sedation in the ER, there's a paramedic in the room unless they're on a call, but they'll wait till we get back usually. And then anybody gets tubed in the ER, like the paramedics are in there. Probably like 50% of the time, the paramedics will be doing the tube in the ER. If there's a code blue on the floor or really anything a doctor goes to, a paramedic will go with them. And then rapid responses on the floor is, I think, an ICU nurse and a paramedic. So no other staff go up. So we do kind of a lot in the hospital besides like essentially like IV team stuff as well on the floors.
So why do you like that more than a private where you can go watch videos and play video games in between calls.
Number one, I get super bored. I'd be pacing around, which I did like when I went back to Trinity briefly. Like, watch me pace all night in the garage. Um, but it's nice to like go in and take care of the patients and then see kind of where they go after they get to the ER. So like you bring somebody in and then like an hour later, almost everybody's like in the chart and you look at their labs, you look at their, CAT scan reads and their x-rays, you go talk to the doc and be like, oh, hey, what's going on there? You have like a really good working relationship with the ER nurses and the docs. So like I can come in with anybody and I mean, we've had a couple of new doctors, but you can go, hey, doctor, whoever, like, I think this is what's going on. This is what I did, blah, blah, blah. And they'll go, okay. And they'll like think about it. And so knowing them and knowing everybody makes it a lot easier when you're like shitting your pants at 3 a.m., like calling the doctor, like, hey, this is a dissection. I'm going to bring him to Portsmouth. Like, if that's okay with you. And they're like, please just go. We'll call ahead and we'll let them know. So that makes like stuff like that way easier.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
nice.
And generational differences, right? My generation versus millennials and Xers and all that. But one of the things I enjoyed about that scenario also was there were times when like PL would say, hey, dumbass, come here. Literally, quote unquote, dumbass, come here. And we'd step outside and he'd tell me what I did wrong. Or he'd ask me why I did something and I'd tell him why I thought he was wrong. But we'd go back and forth and I learned from it and we walk back inside buddies again. Or still,
I messed up something a couple weeks ago, and our medical director, like as I walked in, handed me a sticky note, and it had like two numbers, one over the other, and I was like, "What is this?" He's like, "You see the top number? That's what you should have given. The bottom number, it's what you gave." And I was like, "Yeah, right." I was like, "Ugh," and he's like, "We're good. That was it." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. Cool, easy," because we just know them so well.
That's cool. So you work in a system that I worked in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Your siblings have worked in systems that I worked in before. Your poor brother, Brian, went all the way to Cataldo in like Somerville to try to get away from me. And his first shift there, he texted me and went, hey, this guy says hi. And you could just see him like, tying the noose around the shower head at work.
I'm sorry.
You work with or at least did. I mean, there's been a lot of turnover, but have worked through the last 10 years with a lot of people who I've been very close to. How did that affect you, good and bad?
I think there was a lot to live up to there. And then with previous administration, it was like an uphill battle, I think. And then it was the problem that I am your kid. So let me just run my mouth, like, unfortunately. So I think that was it was like a two-way street with kind of old Frisbee things. But now there's been so much turnover that I think like the people I work with like know that my dad's a paramedic, but probably if you walked into the ER, it'd be, oh, hey, it's Amanda's dad, not like, oh, it's Kevin's daughter. So that's kind of funny.
I mean, other than the current management, Jess and Kevin, who I've known forever and used to work with.
Love them.
So actually, I told Kevin I was going to ask you how you loved working with one of my old partners, ... And Kevin.
Oh, but, Kevin, that's fine. Kevin and I worked on a truck yesterday. It was great.
So now I'll get him in trouble. So ask him about the skunk call someday.
Oh God! All right.
Skunk and Polaroid cameras. Ask him about that. I was not there, and he was mad at me because I wasn't. So, anyways, yeah. Tell me about Richard.
Hey man, how you doing? This is Dick. I'm sitting in my blind here, eating turkey. I just shot one. It's a big son of a bitch.
Oh my God, I love Richard. I love the city of Rochester, and Richard is the most Rochester thing ever. So, Dick was an employee. Was like what, one of the first ones at Frisbee?
Yes, he was the first one through the door.
April 1st, 1980. I'm not sure if he's always been that short, if he just like shrank over the years of 911 abuse in Rochester. but Richard's an EMT intermediate or an advanced EMT now, and he just retired in the fall, I think. Loved working with Richard because he probably knew more than you did. And if he said like, "Oh, what do you think about this?" You should probably listen to him because the cats are trying to escape. Um, you should probably listen to him because he like knows more than you do. And it's interesting because people will be like, "Oh, well, I don't want to work with Richard." And I'm like, "Well, Richard probably doesn't want to work with you." Okay. How many generations of brand new know-it-all paramedics did this man have to work with? So I don't know, but I don't know.
Yeah, he was my first regular partner as a brand new parapup. And I mean, I remember a day at a motorcycle accident in East Rochester. I said, "You start at the feet, I'll unresponsive. You start at the feet, I'll start at the head. We'll meet in the middle." And I'm a paramedic. I was an Army medic at this time. I'd been an intimate, all right. And we get to the middle. I go, "What you find?" He goes, "He's got a fractured symphysis pubis." And I went, "A what?" He goes, "A fractured symphysis pubis." I go, "Richard, English." He goes, "He broke his pelvis." Oh, bad, bad. I learned more from him than probably any single individual. And when I left in 93, 94, I left in 94, came back in 2000, that generation of newer medics had beat him down. Like he wouldn't open his mouth. He just pissed me off. And it took me years and years to get him to like open up on calls again. But I always treated him with, I mean, the utmost respect because he knew it. If he, like you said, he'd seen it, he'd done it. If he said, my lighting changed somehow, that you should do this, yeah, you should. Absolutely.
I
And
think
I
that was
ran
kind of
on,
the like case at the end there because people would be like, "Oh, well, Richard's taking forever on this call," and I'm like, probably Richard's taking forever if I had to guess, knowing the man, because you're an idiot. Like, yeah, if you want to mansplain to this 40-year EMT how to do a simple call, like, I would treat you like shit too. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like, maybe if you were actually acted like a human being, then it would be fine. And there were a bunch of people that were like, "Oh, like that's true." I'm like, man's been doing EMS 10 years longer than you've been alive. Like, probably pump the brakes a little bit and then it would go fine. So
he'd been doing
I'm
it
like,
there 10 years longer. He'd been doing this since the,
right, right.
so yeah. And I think the lesson there is don't be a paragod. There
Yeah,
are people of lower licensure levels that we can learn from.
right.
Love them to death. Um, one of the things that I've always advised people, like in a hospital system, especially now that I'm back in private EMS, take advantage of everything the hospitals have to offer. Education benefits, 401k, 403, whatever it is. They max and match a ton more, insurances, all that stuff. So I love having your input on like the benefits to a hospital based system,
Mm-hmm.
but I think the financial side of it, you may or may not make more money there per hour, but they get shift differentials.
Right.
You can go to nursing school, respiratory therapy school, whatever you want, and they'll reimburse you a ton of it. They'll pay for conferences. When I was at Exeter, they paid me and paid my way to go to Baltimore for a GEMS conference. I paid an airplane
Hmm.
ticket for your mother. We went to, Baltimore for like 4 days,
Hmm.
basically on the hospital. So there's a ton of benefits that I don't think we always take advantage of. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. What is your current work? Well, let me see. Educationally and career-wise, what are you currently working on and towards?
Well, concurrently with being a paramedic for the last like, oh God, like 8 or 9 years, I've been apprenticed to a midwife, um, to become a midwife, which probably I just need to get my shit together and test for it. So that's what I've been working on. It's kind of like the old school way to do it. Like you can take an apprenticeship with a midwife and just do all these competencies and test out of it and get your numbers and stuff like that. There are schools to do it. Like there's one in Maine that's pretty popular. And I think the appeal there was that I didn't have to go to nursing school. Like, I don't want to be a nurse. So it's more of like a certificate program, kind of like a paramedic thing, where you don't have to have a nursing license. There's some, like, not limitations on it. Like, you could do home births and birth center stuff, but you can't work in the hospital. But that's fine because I don't particularly want to go to hospital births anyway.
So that's the nurse midwife can do in-house. And
yeah, a nurse midwife is like a provider, like an NP or a PA. So it's not that the program is necessarily a whole lot different, but it's just that like provider level at the hospital that the hospital needs to see.
What are the requirements like, and the competencies that you have to be able to show?
It's a lot like paramedic school, actually. So like you have to go to so many births and you have to do so many prenatal appointments, so many postnatal appointments. And then like continuity of care, you need to have 10 clients that you've seen, prenatals, postnatals, and their birth. You have to do like suturing, to kind of like skill wise things like that. At the end, there's a national registry test, or National Association of Registered Midwives. There's a big test at the end, much like the paramedic one. And then you like get your state license, because midwives in New Hampshire are licensed as well as in like Maine and Massachusetts. Not all states have midwives. So like if you go to West Virginia and you have a midwife, probably it's something more like a lay midwife. It's somebody who's been doing it for a long time, but doesn't necessarily have like the certificate or the licensure, or like the formal education behind it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Tomato. Is it midwifery or midwifery?
Midwifery.
Midwifery? Damn it. Your mother was right. I called it wifery and your mother's
Old English.
Like, whiffery.
I think it's from Old English, like midwife, like to be with woman, I think is what it was technically the term means, but.
That was like midwife, midwifery. This is why I hate math too.
I think you could call it both. I wouldn't, but.
Well, you're the expert. Why? What drew you to this?
As cliche as it is, I saw a documentary in early 2010, maybe. This woman, Ricki Lake, I think is her name. She's like a TV lady. I don't know. She did this documentary, super interesting, called The Business of Being Born. And she looked at like the history of midwifery in the United States and obstetrical care. And I mean, I'm sure it was a little like conspiracy theory-ish about, you know, the C-section rates in the US, which are just astronomical. It kind of went over all of those things and followed a couple people as they were like pregnant, had their babies. And I liked her documentary because it wasn't saying that hospitals are evil, but it's not always the best option for everybody. But when you need a hospital to have a C-section, like that's what it's there for. So I thought that was super interesting. And then, so Amy Darling is the midwife I work with. I knew her through where we went to school because her mom was the principal. So I sent her an email and was like, hey, I don't know how this works, but I'd like to learn more about it. And so I went and met with her and she was like, cool, you're my student now. And we've just been essentially hanging out for like 8 or 9 years now. She probably would like to slap the shit out of me and be like, why don't you go test so she can retire? But I just haven't yet.
So other than being a slacker and procrastinating with this.
Lifelong procrastinator, yeah.
And again, you are my daughter. So how long or how short a time could you have done it in the way you did it as an apprentice?
It would depend on kind of where you're with for your apprenticeship. Like if you went to Concord Birth Center, you probably get it done in like 16 or 18 months because they're busy. You know, the birth center in Stratham was busy, and like there's one in the Cottage, I think, in Milford. Those are all like super busy places. So if you could find a midwife that would let you leech onto her for a year or two, you get it done pretty quick. The midwife I'm with is not as busy. So it takes a couple years to like, probably I could have done it in like 4 or 5 years, but then it just kind of like things came up where like, oh, I'd be busier doing this, and so wouldn't see her as much, or she would not take any clients for this 1 year because she had like 5 kids, so like stuff with the kids or whatever. So it's kind of a little bit longer, but I like
What
it. It works for us.
the programs in Maine? How long are they?
They're 2 year certificate programs.
Okay.
So like when I first started with Amy, she had a student from Birthwise that would like go to all her prenatals and go to her births with her. So
Hmm.
they send
Now,
students down. Like Concord Birth Center has a couple students, I think, usually going at all times from Birthwise, which is the one that's in Maine.
So start to finish, run me through a patient.
So we'll do, usually people email us or call us or whatever, especially like repeat clients, like text you, LOL, I'm pregnant again. And so we would see them at, I think, usually around 12 to 14 weeks. We'll do an intake, we'll do a bunch of baseline lab work, we'll do a urine, we'll see them, we'll do all their vitals and do like a, you know, early pregnancy exam. And then after that, we'll see them every 4 weeks. So like 12, 16, 20. If they want to get an ultrasound, they can. We'll send them out either if they have an OB office that they want to go to, or there's a private practice in Seabrook or Hampton, somewhere over there, that the lady will do ultrasounds for them. They don't have to in the state of New Hampshire have an ultrasound. And then, so every 4 weeks up until like 32, and then we see them every 2 weeks until 36, and then we'll see them every week until they have their baby.
What are like disqualifications for going through a midwife?
So in the state of New Hampshire, there's a bunch of like benchmarks that you have to meet. Your H&H has to be good enough to do a home birth, and otherwise, like there's some like lab values, stuff like that. We don't do preeclampsia. Like, so if you come to us and your blood pressure is high, or your like baseline blood pressure is high enough that you're on medications, then we will not take those clients because we don't have like the services that they need. So those guys would kind of, we call it like risking out of it. There's some like probably like medical issues, like, you know what I mean? If you have cerebral palsy, you probably shouldn't have a baby at home with us. But generally healthy people with good lab work are people that we'll take. We've done IVF clients who like had to do IVF to get pregnant, and then they were like, okay, I'm healthy, we'll see you at home. So that's kind of fun. It's not necessarily as like, some things would not risk you out necessarily, as long as you're generally a healthy person. Even like obesity is not generally a huge risk factor, even though like I think some OBs would disagree with that, or even like geriatric, clients, like people over the age of 40. We've done those too. So I think it would just be like, I think if you were like 52 having a baby at home, we might be like, oh, it's a bit much. But so
Why is that a risk?
there's just increased risk for like bleeding, and like preeclampsia and all those things are kind of like higher risk at like late 40s, 50s. So
Insurances.
but if you were 48 and you were a super healthy person, then all right. Especially if it's one of our clients that's like had a bunch of babies with us, we're like, all right, cool.
Yeah, and no prior issues.
Right.
Will insurances pay for midwife?
Insurance reimbursement is super tricky, because to get insurance reimbursement for really anything is kind of a pain in the ass. And you almost need like a good HR person that at wherever you get your insurance to really get covered. Medicare, Medicaid will reimburse, but they reimburse such a small fraction of it. So like, let's say it's $4,000 to have your baby, with us. Medicare's like, cool, here's $879. you know, that's not like an exact number, but they like reimburse very low.
Right.
Um,
Like
so it
EMS.
kind of, yeah. So it usually ends up being like cash clients or like combination.
And it's weird that with the cost of medical care and
Hmm.
insurances, that they wouldn't seek out some of these healthier, lower cost options as opposed to a $35,000 delivery in a hospital.
Right.
Crazy.
And I think it's hard because like kind of in the early 1900s, late 1800s, people before that had their births with midwives or like the family doctor that came around, you know what I mean? And then there was kind of this big push that midwifery wasn't as good. And so there's a big like smear campaign kind of done against midwifery, which so midwives were almost eradicated really in the US until like the 60s with the hippies and communes and people that had their own kind of traveling caravans and stuff. And um, so like those midwives really like brought midwifery back to the United States. So it's kind of been an uphill battle since then. It's much better, but it's kind of hard to like justify when everyone's like, well, the hospital's the best place. Because if you tell somebody you're gonna have a home birth, they're like, what? Not like always, but that's a lot of the reaction. Like when I'm like, oh, when I have kids, I want to have a home birth. People are like, excuse me, why would you
Yeah,
do such a thing? I'm like, because it's great.
I think the only time we hear about this or experience we have with it, whether it be EMS or the ERs, are when something goes south. And unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
I've been to an unnamed center in New Hampshire a couple of times, but not recently. I mean, I left there
Mm-hmm.
7 years ago. A couple of times for like things that really floored me, like, what about the blue baby?
Right.
Are we going to do anything about the blue baby? Well, the baby's fine.
Right.
No, the baby's blue,
Right.
but we don't
And I
know
think it's
the total numbers that
right.
they're great. Everybody's happy. Everybody's healthy. People are home in their
Mm-hmm.
own bed that night, comfortable, not being woken up by
Right.
freaking call bells.
Right. I think it's hard because people are like, oh, well, everybody's got that horror story. One time I went to this home birth that went wrong. And I'm like, but it's like anything. Some of the paramedics that I've worked with over years, I've been like, leave me for dead because I don't want that person in the ambulance with me. You know, it's the same thing with midwives. Like they're bad practitioners in anything. And also as far as like the birth centers go and the home birth midwives in New Hampshire, like you'd be surprised at the volume that they push through there. So they're when they're calling you like
No pun
it's
intended.
because right. So we like say like, oh, we went to this horrific whatever, and I'm like, yeah, but they did 350 births the rest of the year that you guys never even knew about, that you guys wouldn't even hear about,
Right.
you know. So, and I
Yeah.
think they're good people to have with you. So like some people are like, well, I don't want that person in the ambulance. I'm like, well, I do because they know this patient, they know their client, they know a lot, hell of a lot more than I do. You know what I mean? So it's not never a bad idea as long as they're not like harming the situation more to be like, yeah, bring that midwife with you. Like, you know, because things that concern us are things that they're like, no, that's fine. Or even like bagging babies. Like that would happen a lot more than you think. Like some babies are just slow to start and you like bag them for 30 seconds and they're fine. Like the midwives do that a lot and you would have no idea that that's like not necessarily abnormal. You know what I
Right.
mean? So,
Yeah. I think one of the things I want to have you do is a short class on. I mean, you've done classes for me on childbirth,
mhm.
but I want to have one to put up because yes, you're my daughter, but I go to the experts. I don't,
Right.
I've delivered babies. I'm comfortable delivering babies. I just don't want to ever do it again.
Right.
And you love it. The thing,
Yeah.
the thing I walked out of those. So I went to that center a couple of times for a couple of, not hot things. But they also called us once or twice just to kind of stand by, like, oh, this
Right.
labor went long. And so I literally just kind of stood there and watched how they interacted, and it impressed the hell out of me that they knew each
Hmm.
other, they were comfortable with each other. The midwife
Hmm.
could say some things to her that I'd get fired for saying, um,
Right.
because it was a relationship. And I know that with you four, the only reason there was a relationship with the nursing staff and the docs at Frisbee is because We had both worked there. We knew everyone.
Right.
But other than that, there wasn't. And I like the idea of midwifery. Um, I like it. And so I was super excited to think about having you on here to talk a little bit about it.
It's
What?
fun because it's like a team. You know what I mean? I remember going to the first home birth that I went to. It was July 4th, and it was probably like 2012, maybe, or 13. I don't even remember. And I got there and I was like, Amanda, what have you fucking done? I was like, oh my God, I have made a mistake. I'm going to watch these people die. And I was just like in the corner, quietly panicking the entire time, sweating profusely because it was so hot out. And then at the end of it, I was like, just sat in the corner and cried. I was like, that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And it was super cool. And like, Amy knew the clients. She delivered I think their other baby, or it was this lady's second home birth. And I was like, wow, that was wild. And it was like a big team effort and it was great. And it was so much different than the births I had done in paramedic school. I went to Concord and did all my clinical time there. And like, I really liked being at Concord, but the like the births there were just so much different that I was scared to go to a home birth because I saw like kind of how stressful these hospital births were. And so then I went to this home birth and I was like, oh, that was different. There was no stress. There was no like, there's an emergency until, oh, we have your baby and now they're very healthy. Congratulations. And you're like, but the baby was probably healthy the whole time. But it was just like a different viewpoint on it. So
My experience, like at Frisbee, we went to a bunch of births upstairs. Like, oh, the doc
mhm.
is off golfing, and mom's pushing. We need an ER doc, and it's like the
Mhm.
nurses who have been involved in thousands of births are calling an
Mhm.
ER doc up who hasn't done one since med school, and he's the
Right.
expert, and
Right.
or I am because now the doc's going, you've done this more than I have recently, and I'm like, what the, and
And
it
it's
is.
kind of a disservice to the nurses because they could do it.
Oh
They
yeah,
they do this. They do this all the time. Like, oh, the doctor went to go, take a tinkle break, and oh, mom had a baby, and the nurses are great. Like they could really do it without the doctors, but it's just because they're like constraints there that they need a provider in the room. That
yep,
you know what I mean? I'm like, because I've gone up and done births with the docs on the floor, especially like at night, and the ER doc will be like, "Hey, you with the midwifery, let's go." And so it's like I go up there, and before like I knew a lot of the nurses up there, they would be like, "Who's this paramedic?" And I'm just like sitting on the bed doing whatever. Oh, here's your baby, like, you know what I mean?
yeah,
So it's just kind of interesting.
yeah. It's a complete different environment. Um,
I did a birth over the summer with like we had for a while at night, like the best night crew ever at Frisbee. And so we were all just, four peas in a pod. And I heard the other truck go out for a childbirth. And so I told my partner, I'm like, let's just head up there. And so we head up there in that direction. And the guy on the other truck, Rick's one of my like really good friends at Frisbee, called me and was like, I need you right now. I'm like, all right, all right, all right. And so we get in the truck and it's just interesting, like the different like comfort level on it because the other paramedic was like trying to get a line, trying to do these things. And I was like, walked in and I was like, oh, mom's pushing. Like, we'll just have a baby right here. And it was like super chill. And my partner was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I'm like, it's all right, it's done. Like, so it was fun. That
yeah.
kind of stuff is fun.
What? All right. Back to the whole medic thing. Think back to your programs. Tell me something that one of your people, one of your instructors or preceptors told you that is stuck in your mind and that you still use a lot today.
Sick or not sick. You know what I mean? I feel like we do that a lot. Like, I love teaching new paramedics, like, especially at night, like, to take a new paramedic and be like, all right, my child, like, let me help you make you into kind of what Frisbee's looking for a paramedic. And so a lot of the time I just like go back to that. I'm like, was this person sick or are they not sick? Like, I feel like we do that a lot, even with paramedic students, like, because we have a bunch that ride with us. I think we have three right now. And they'll be like, kind of like buzzing around, and you're like, just stop. Like, are they sick or are they not sick?
Yep.
If oh, they're sick, then you're like, okay, then what do we do? Well, if they're not sick, then we can talk about what to do,
Yeah, absolutely. From the door, sick, not sick. Yes and no question. Absolutely.
Right.
Cool. What advice other than sick, not sick would you have for new providers of any level?
I think going back to it, like I've said a couple times, like recently at work too, I'm like, you should probably get a therapist. Like, if you want to do this for any sort of longevity, like, I don't know, it's like 10 years paramedic. I feel like it's like twice the career expectancy of a paramedic right now. Like, people don't usually go that long. So even then, like, to have the guys like you that have been doing it forever are just like unheard of. So I'm like, go to a therapist and work through your life shit. So that way, when you have a bad call, you can like function, or you can have skills to talk about. Like, that was terrible. That was the worst moment of my life as far as work goes. And I was never so overwhelmed, but I can think about it because now I have these tools to like process my life and not take it out on my family or just drink your way through it. Like, this, that's not going to help you at all. You know what I mean? And then I think like for new providers and stuff, it'd be like, get a hobby. Like, you went through paramedic school, which was hellacious, and you've done 320 hours of ride time, and then you were working, and all you've done is sleep, eat, and breathe paramedicine for 2 or 3 years. So like, probably go get a hobby. Like, you don't need to kill yourself like doing work 900% of the time. Like, oh well, I work here 48 hours a week, and then I work here per diem, and then I'm a called paramedic firefighter in BFE, New Hampshire. You know, like, probably take some time off. Like, I think is important. So like, you can function when you're at work, when you don't like, that's not all you're doing 100% of the time. So I think it's important to like be able to relax and do something else, or else you're not gonna like be able to do this forever. Because then when you break your leg and you can't do it, then your world's gonna like collapse around you because you have no hobbies. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Go hang out with your family. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean, EMT 101. I talk about that, right? You got to have a balance, and we know a lot of people who don't have that balance, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and they're gonna burn out fast. They're gonna burn their families out fast. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
families only want you getting up from one holiday dinner a year to go answer a pager. You know what I mean? It's tough.
Right.
And fire chiefs
And
get
it's
pissy.
tough for, especially for like people who like don't understand. It's hard like when if your partner doesn't understand what you do. Like, I'm lucky in that, and Matt does, like, because he does the same thing. So I think it's like, don't like burn your families out either, you know?
Absolutely. All right, one last question for you. Best for the
Go ahead.
last. You work with a bunch of new parapups who
My little
educate.
penguins, yes.
All right, so educationally have far more book education than I did. And you also work with some old guys who are basically my experience level or within 10 years of me at 35 years, right?
Right.
What's the difference? And I'm not talking like, well, experience levels and all that, but what do you see as a difference? Because you're a tweener to me. You're right between them. What do you see the differences between the new and the old?
I think it's funny because lately I've been like feeling in that old category, because like one of the new kids right out of school will be like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, huh? I'm like, I've never heard of such a thing. Let me get on the internet real quick. And so I think they're getting a lot more like A&P, anatomy, like they're getting a lot more education where maybe not necessarily like as skill driven, which we like teach skills. Like, I can teach a new paramedic how to do new paramedic things all day long. But sometimes they'll come up with like this educational stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I've never heard of that. Like, good for you. And like learn from them too, which is nice.
Yeah, but they don't know how to do this skill. And I had this argument with a clinical leader of mine recently by email who said that, and called me a dinosaur actually, because I can't change with the times. But I said we should be doing mandatory once or twice a year skills reviews. And that our new medics should have a list of skills they need to get checked off, because they're not getting it in school. And I was told, oh, yes, they are. The registry verifies these people are wonderful. Who do you think you are to say we should double check skills on our new employees? I was like, well,
Right.
that registry exam, and I got chewed on for this statement. I did not come up with this. This was said to me by somebody at New Hampshire EMS. The National Registry is a test of minimally accepted knowledge.
Mm.
We are responsible for passing on our knowledge to that next generation. So it's interesting to hear you say that.
And it's funny because that's what I love. Like paramedic students like you and I've talked about, even if they're lovely, stress me the hell out. I was a terrible paramedic student. I'm sorry to Brian and Ed. Like, I want to go back in time and beat myself to death. But I just like new paramedic students, stressful. New paramedics all day. Like, so somebody else hopefully went through the like tribulation of teaching you like what baseline paramedicine is. But then like, cool, now you've had your test and you generally know what it should be going or what we should be doing now, then like chef's kiss. Like those ones we can teach. Like I think it's easier to like teach those guys. So like having worked nights for like the last couple of years, that was my favorite. Like because new paramedics tend to get put on night shift because that's where the openings are. Because everybody who's old like me now that went to day shift left those openings at night. And so it's like cool. Like I can hang out with my homies and talk about what we need to do all the time. So it's just like interesting because I don't like necessarily mind that they need some fine tuning because like I can't shut the hell up. So I'll just like talk your ear off all night. Like that's fine. So
Yeah, I do the same thing. In fact, one of my partners at Frizz, who is now a PA in a large ER, by the way, who I bow to, we used to joke and call him Grasshopper because in the old TV show Kung Fu, when Kwai Chang Caine, the master, was but a young apprentice in this whatever, he was Grasshopper. So Grasshopper has become the master now, and I feel good when that sort of thing happens. If I've helped somebody get better, I mean, it's why I teach now. It's why I do these videos. It's why, it makes me feel better that if I do one-on-one patient care, right? Every ambulance call one-on-one, I help one person at a time. But if I can help those 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 new parapups, then I'm helping 5, 6, 7 people at a time and exponentially with education. So I think that's very interesting to hear that come from you. And
that's my favorite when somebody will text me and be like, oh my gosh, I did this call and I was thinking about you and I killed it. And I'm like, oh, yeah. So proud of you. You know what I mean? Like all my little children like love that.
Will Riley and Craig Clough both in their interviews when I asked them for advice said the same thing: mentor people, or a variation, but mentor, teach, pass it on, because we don't really have enough of that, I don't think, right now. So
I think it's better than it used to be. Like I don't think like when I started at Frisbee before, it was a lot of the like old salty guys at night, and like they would teach you, but they weren't excited to be doing it. You know what I mean? Like, like, hey, stop fucking that up. And then you were like, oh, gee, well, what do you want me to do? Like, to do it right. And you were like, oh, I don't really know what that is. Like, I've only been doing this a couple years. And so I think, like, at least at Frisbee right now, that is not the environment. And it's really nice. Like, so our younger kids can be like, oh my gosh, we did this and we didn't really know what to do. And we'll be like, oh, well, let's talk it through. Or like, one of our guys right now is in paramedic school, but he works for us full time as an A. And so we're like, all right, Max, like, what do you think you should do with this? Like, I think we have a really good environment there, at least where we're mentoring people, because we have kind of these tweeners and then we have like our brand new kids. And so it's nice.
Absolutely. I think, that whole generation millennial stuff, I think that is one of the improvements that have come along. My generation, sink or swim, dumbass, but I had people who told me why I was being a dumbass.
Right.
And that hasn't always been it. You get it's almost like hazing that gets carried downhill. And it is
Mm-hmm.
nice to see that. And it's hard, like for me to have come around to that, to say, hey, what do you think? Why would you? Why should we? So it's
Mm-hmm.
good. Um,
Right.
anything else that you want to impart wisdom wise on us?
I don't know if I have a lot of wisdom in part, but I can't really think of anything.
Cool. Well, thank you
I don't
very much.
know.
I appreciate you
Thank
overcoming the nerves and meeting with dear old dad on the video. But I
you.
appreciate it.
God.
And go
You're
work on my
welcome.
grandchildren.
Go what?
Go work on my grandchildren.
I've got you 3 to go right here. It's a start.
You did not reply to me the other night though when you said, well, 3 and 3 years might be a little much. Maybe it'll be 2. And I went, oh great, 3 and 2 years, twins, perfect.
No, because I won't be home birthing twins. That's unacceptable. So,
All right. Well, thank
all
you.
right.
I love you
You're
very
welcome.
much. All right.
I love you too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.